The anniversary, I just wanted to start with personal memories of the miners' strike. Were really about my dad in his prime. Someone had had the bright idea to give my dad a whole page on the Mirror once a week, his own page, in the early 80s. And then along came the miners' strike, and he devoted that year to getting as many of the miners' stories into the paper. And if you went to meet him for lunch at the Mirror, there were always groups of miners there from different parts of the country telling their stories. And sometimes we get calls from Scargill in the house, and whenever that happened there was a lot of excitement, particularly around the NACODS issue, where it was very close. Everyone felt very close to a victory. I'm going to speak to a couple of key points in the book, which is a series of chapters about different protests, but starts off pretty early on with the Orgreave story. To understand the miners' strike, you have to go back not 40 years, but 41 years. In January 1983, a very evil thing took place in Whitehall. There was a secret meeting with Willie Whitelaw, the Home Secretary, the top civil servants, and the top police officers in the country. And they were celebrating, it was a party, they were celebrating the construction, the formation of a manual on public disorder. Nobody else knew about this manual. It was a 500-page document, and on the front page it says, for ACPO officers only. So even the rank and file of the police didn't know that this manual existed. And what that did, that undemocratic act, an extraordinary undemocratic act that Parliament knew nothing about, was it handed to the police in this country paramilitary powers. Paramilitary powers that hadn't even come from Northern Ireland. They spoke to the people from Northern Ireland, and that wasn't strong enough. They'd taken them from Hong Kong. That's where they preferred. And it gave the police brutal powers. And that's what happened in the miners' strike. They started to use those brutal powers. And what you saw in Orgreave was the strength of that manual that he'd given them. The ability to incapacitate someone just for being present was written into the manual. And that's what happens with the horse charges, which come straight out the manual, and then the first use in this country of the short shield and the baton. The squads coming in behind the horses comes straight out of the manual. First use in the UK comes from this manual. Nobody knew about it. Parliament never knew about it. No one has ever fessed up to the role that the Home Secretary had in that. So that's the most important thing to understand. And I know that Gareth Pearce described coming up here to Rotherham, to the police station here after the Orgreave protest, as the worst thing she'd seen in the police station. Blood running down the corridor of Rotherham police station with the people she dealt with there. Now, the second thing to understand is that the whole argument throughout the strike of Thatcher in regards to the police was a lie. She said repeatedly, the police are independent. They apply the rule of law. They're not connected to the government. But having just secretly giving them paramilitary powers, that was a complete lie. But in the way she ran the strike, it was the complete opposite of the truth. In the first week of the strike, she set up two organisations. One, the National Reporting Centre, which was publicly known, which organised what was called mutual aid, organised lots of coppers going from one area to another in vast numbers, and basically gave them a blank cheque to have as many police officers as they wanted. But in addition to that, she set up a thing called MISC 101, which wasn't publicly known. And it was a secret part of the cabinet that would meet at least once a week, usually twice a week, which she chaired. And intelligence would come into the National Reporting Centre and go straight to the Home Secretary and go into MISC 101. And so every week she was planning what she was doing with the strike through the police intelligence. And by September, she went even further and set up another secret organisation called the National Intelligence Unit that was spying on miners and whose aim was to criminalise basically the leadership of the strike. So just prior to Orgreave, the MISC 101 have a discussion which she is chairing about support for the police efforts to bring more serious charges where appropriate. And then we see the riot charges, the worst charge that you can face under the Public Order Act in those times, facing a life sentence, coming out of those discussions. So the idea that the police were independent is a sick joke. And I'll just complete that part of the story, just reading a little bit of this book. Now this is the toughest part for some people, no doubt, in this room. The miners walked back to work in March 1985 with trade union banners held high. A few days later, the Home Office held another party to thank the police for all they did during the miners' strike. A drinks event had been planned for the previous summer, but ACPO got cold feet due to fears of over-close identification with the government during the miners' strike. Around 30 guests attended, including those from the police forces most directly involved in the miners' strike, senior staff of the National Reporting Centre, ACPO, Sir Brian Cooper, he is the top civil servant. As they celebrated the creation of the secret manual in 1983, so they celebrated its successful, brutal use 2 years later. Also at the celebration was Chief Constable Peter Wright and Assistant Chief Constable Clement from South Yorkshire Police, who had overseen the policing at Orgreave, and Mrs. Thatcher.